My next guest is an independent political analyst and author of the Great American Political Trivia Challenge, Rich Rubino. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me on again.
All right, let me just ask you this. Does Iowa matter as much as it used to? Now, I understand, like I'm a checks and balances guy. I get that you would want rural Midwestern states, the heartland of the country, weighing in first to give a counterweight to the obvious population density of the coastal states. But does Iowa still matter like it used to?
Well, I think if you look at the people who actually win Iowa and then how they do, and then in terms of what happens in the rest of the primaries and the general election, there is a history of candidates winning Iowa than not being able to win in the general election. The primary, rather. For example, Dick Gephardt won in 1988. He did not win the nomination for the Democratic side. Tom Harkin won in 1992. He did not win the nomination, didn't even win another state after that. On the Republican side, you certainly have examples, whether it was George H.W. Bush talking about the Big Mo after winning in 1980, or Bob Dole in 1988, then did not go on to win the nomination, Rick Santorum, Mike Huckabee. So it's not quite as relevant. There's actually a history of a lot of candidates. Even last time around, Donald Trump. Donald Trump did not win Iowa. He came in third in Iowa, but then he went on to New Hampshire. I think New Hampshire is more relevant, generally speaking, to who wins the primary than Iowa. Iowa, in some respects, is just kind of an outlier. It's become that.
Should Ron DeSantis focus his energy on Iowa or somewhere else if he wants to break out of the pack?
In Ron DeSantis's case, it has to be Iowa because he needs essentially to be the main alternative to Donald Trump. And the fact that his polls have gone so far down, the fact that they've waned so much, he needs to show that he is still that person. Now, here's the advantage for him. The fact that he was at one point almost tied with Donald Trump, the fact that he's gone down to a certain degree, all he has to do now is come in ahead of Nikki Haley. And the next day of the coverage is not necessarily going to be that Donald Trump won, because Donald Trump is expected to win. Okay, that's the scenario that most in the media and most pretty much any political observers say. It's just a matter of how much Donald Trump is going to win. But if Ron DeSantis could come in second in Iowa, then there's going to be a move among some donors, among some benefactors to say, they don't like Donald Trump or want somebody other than him. We need somebody else. We need to consolidate toward this person. And I think what he should do is try to replicate Bill Clinton's strategy back in 1992. Bill Clinton was ahead at one point. Then after the Jennifer Flowers issue, his polls attenuated, went down to about 5%. Then he moved up, came in second place to Paul Tsongas, still lost by 9 points. But you know what? He declared himself Bill Clinton. New Hampshire has made Bill Clinton the comeback kid. And the next day, the coverage was that Bill Clinton is now essentially almost that he had won. And then he went on. He landed up winning in Georgia, winning in the South, and ended up winning the nomination. So there is a strategy for DeSantis. So he does have to put all of his eggs in this proverbial basket, hoping that after Iowa, he can go on to other states, and that the benefactors will be with him, and that he'll get some of what George H.W. Bush gave the moniker to, the Big Mo.
It didn't hurt that Andrew Cuomo introduced Bill Clinton to the donor class of the Upper West Side of Manhattan here in New York City.
Against Jerry Brown, right?
Let's talk tonight. I have not in any way consulted or colluded with my colleague Hugh Hewitt. Salem is a partner tonight. Is there an issue that candidates should look for to give them an edge on Donald Trump? Is there something they should be hoping they're asked that might give them that breakout moment?
Not an actual issue, but I think what's probably more important if you look at the Republican voters, is electability in the general election. And can they defeat, assuming Joe Biden's a Democratic nominee, can they defeat him? And I think whatever Republican candidate is going to make the case, they're going to say in the general election, Donald Trump has baggage. I don't have that baggage. I think in the case of Ron DeSantis specifically, and this is the case I would make if I were Ron DeSantis, I would say, I was elected just barely the first time I ran for governor in 2018. I just won the biggest re-election since Bob Graham in 1982 in a swing state in Florida. This shows essentially that voters, once they get to know me, they like me, and this shows my electability, and compare himself with Donald Trump's electability. I think Nikki Haley will essentially do the same thing, say I was elected twice. I won by a bigger margin the time I ran for re-election. Tim Scott can talk to his own re-election. So I think, and Chris Christie, the fact that he won re-election in a blue state, in a predominantly blue state, the fact that he won in New Jersey and that he won overwhelmingly, they should try to make that case that they could essentially replicate that on the national playing field.
I just asked this of my buddy Mark Davis. You know, we're talk radio guys. We know that none of these candidates can steal MAGA from Donald Trump. MAGA is the biggest plurality now. If you don't steal MAGA from Donald Trump, you're not getting the nomination.
I think that they're looking for trying to each candidate, and certainly every poll right now would show Donald Trump is almost the insurmountable favorite. But what they want to do is they want to become the one alternative to Donald Trump, so that after Iowa, and then potentially if they come in second in Iowa, second in New Hampshire, then they keep going. And then I think their hope is that the other candidates will potentially drop out. Let's say it's Nikki Haley. They'll all endorse Nikki Haley, and there'll be some sort of a move to say, look, Nikki Haley is more electable in the general election than Donald Trump. Why risk it with Donald Trump? Why not have somebody that's essentially Donald Trump without the baggage? And obviously there are policy disagreements. And if it's someone like Chris Christie, then Chris Christie is the only one in the debate anyway that's going to be doing counter programming. All the other candidates are going to try to hug Trump's policies without hugging Trump the individual, whereas Chris Christie is going to say we need to go to a completely different vision of the Republican Party. So in a sense, he actually has that lane all to himself, especially since former Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson, for the second time, has not made the debate.
I don't know. I think the thing that was driving DeSantis for a while was everything you like and nothing you hate about Donald Trump. To say that we're going to have a completely different vision than what? Cutting taxes, rolling back regulations, battling the bloat that's in Washington. The thing that people liked about Donald Trump was he was a guy who didn't owe anybody in the swamp any favors. There are plenty of fine people who are Republicans that try to climb that ladder, but along the way, the deals and the favors and all that other stuff kind of, if they get into the White House, that becomes part of the problem.
Well, I'll just say historically, there's always a candidate who's kind of counter programs. In 1980, in the Republican primary, John Anderson was running on a gas tax, not particularly popular in the Republican primary. So what did he do? After he lose the Republican primary, he ran as an independent. You can go throughout history. 1992, Paul Tsongas was running, and Paul Tsongas was running basically on fiscal austerity, right? He's saying we need to cut spending, but we need to raise the gas tax and cut spending. He landed up, of course, not winning that time. But there's always a candidate who does this. Sometimes they get booed when they try to speak to Republican groups on the Republican side, or on the Democratic side, they get booed. They're kind of the interesting ones sometimes because they're the only ones that are kind of singing from a different hymn book, if you will.
I will confess this to you, as a much younger man, I was a huge Ross Perot fan. I used to love Ross Perot's infomercials. That captivated me at a very, very young age. I don't know if RFK is Ross Perot. I don't know if it's this Dean Phillips, who's now running a primary. I don't know who that Ross Perot figure is. I got 20 seconds.
Well, all I'll say is Kennedy right now, he's doing the same thing John Anderson ran and Ross Perot ran, and George Wallace for that matter. They all did very well right until about October. A third party tends to lose support when voters seem to think it's a wasted vote toward the general election. So he might be at his high water mark right now unless he can break some sort of a precedent.